In this video, we're going to talk about color correction using this clip in DaVinci Resolve version 19. Of course, you can use the free version, and if you want direct access to this material for your practice, you can join this channel. In the VFX Artist and Colorist tier, you'll be able to access all of this material, not only for this practice, but for many more. We're going to tackle this project from start to finish, from importing your project to making adjustments for proper color management, and finally, the step-by-step color correction process, including a tip that I haven't seen in any other color correction video on YouTube, which involves using the color warper in a much more advanced way. It's time to start, and that's with a completely new project. I'm going to go here and tell it that I want to create a new project called Color Practice. Once created, I'm going to go to the first tab to import my material. These are the included files. And what I'm going to do is drag the video over here and tell it that yes, I want to change the project options. The first thing I have to do is go to the project settings, which is the option here on this side. Once I click on it, this window appears, and I'm going to go to the option that says Color Management. On this side, I'm going to select one called DaVinci Color Managed, this one here. And I'm going to uncheck the option for it to be automatic. After this, in color processing, I'm going to say that I want to use DaVinci Wide Gamut. Finally, on this side, in the final output, I'm going to select the one that says sRGB because we're working for digital media. Finally, I click the Save button. And as you can see, nothing happens to our material yet. This is because even though we already chose a color framework for our clip, we haven't told DaVinci which camera our material comes from. To achieve this, we're going to right-click and go to this option that says Input Color Space. On this side, we're going to choose the one that says ARRI-Log C3. Once I click it, I automatically see how my clip is already changing its coloration. This is because these are the levels under which I'll be able to start my color correction. Remember that it's not always necessary to use ARRIs. It all depends on the camera you use to record your video. Now what we have to do is create a new timeline. Right-click and go to the first option, which is to create a new timeline with the selected clip. Once we click it, it will give us this window, and we can give any title to our timeline and click Create. Now that I have my timeline here, I'm going to go to the color section, and it's time to start with our color correction. The first thing I want to do is a general balance. To achieve this, I'm going to go to the Offset option and start lowering the exposure. Why am I lowering it? Because I'm noticing that the skin tones were too high. If I go here on this side to these three dots and put it on Display Qualifier Focus so that I have this checkbox activated, and then I go to this side and select the qualifier option. What I can do is, without clicking, just drag my mouse to the skin tone area, specifically the part of the face, and here I can see that the waveform is telling me what level I'm at. If the skin tones are around 50%, my exposure level is pretty good. If I hadn't made this balance adjustment here, we can see that the skins are already reaching 80%, which is too much exposure for a skin tone. What I can do to start organizing is to put a label, right-click, and put it on Node Label. Here, I'm going to say that this is just my general balance. If I suddenly notice that with this general balance, my clouds are getting a bit underexposed, and maybe I could send them up a bit, what I can do is add a parallel node, Alt and the letter P, and here I'm only going to adjust the highlights. To do this, I'm going to select this option that says Log within these wheels, and I'm going to go to the Highlights option on this side. I click here, and without releasing, drag to the left, and then I can decrease the exposure or increase it if I go to the right side. I don't want to go all the way to 100%, but I do want to raise it a bit above 90. This is the before, and this is the after. This helps me maintain the contrast levels of my image. Here, I can say that I'm making adjustments in the log wheels just for reference. Next, I'm going to start making color adjustments. If you're lost and don't know what kind of color correction your clip might need, what we can do is experiment a bit. Again, in the log wheels section, I can, for example, go to the midtones and experiment. What if I send everything to bluish tones? What if they're magenta or red or yellow? In this case, I personally think yellow suits it quite well, but I can also play with the shadows part. If I click this button, what I'm doing is resetting the adjustment, and I'm going to go to the shadows now. I click and drag, and then I can see which coloration benefits it the most. In this case, as the hair is in very dark areas, I'm seeing that the hair is a bit reddish. So if I take the shadows to an even redder tone, this benefits me quite a bit. I can use Ctrl or Command plus D to see the before and after. And I really see that the red is benefiting my color palette quite a bit. So I'm going to keep that. And in the midtones part, I really liked how it looked in yellowish tones. So I'm going to take it a bit towards there. This is the before and this is the after. Now, I won't always need it to be so high. For example, here I'm seeing that I'm at minus 0.04. I can take the blue to minus 0.02 just to make this change a bit more subtle, and I'm still seeing before and after in the skin tones because I'm taking them a bit towards yellow tones, which looks quite good in this case. I can say that I'm managing shadows, what are the shadows, and the midtones part just for reference. I can also start experimenting with my highlights, but at this moment, I already have my shadows and midtones pretty well adjusted. If I want to adjust them here, I can, but if I put a before and after, I'm going to remove the 3 adjustments I'm modifying within the same node. I'm going to reset my highlights, and what I'm going to do instead is add a parallel, Alt, and the letter P. And in this case, here, I'm only going to modify highlights. So I put that they are highlights. In this case, now I'm going to check what would happen if I send my highlights towards reddish or magenta tones. I see that my clouds go to those tones. Maybe I don't love it. What if I send them to blue, cyan, green, etc.? And in this case, it seems to me that an analogous color palette suits me quite well. This means that I'm using 3 tones that are close together. We're using orange reds for the shadows area, yellows for the midtones area, and for the highlights, we're going to use greenish tones. This is basically guaranteeing that we're going to have very good color harmony. Of course, I don't need it to be so high. I'm going to reset again by clicking this button, and what I'm going to do is just move the blues. I click, drag, and I'm going to take it to 0.03. What I'm seeing here on this side, this is the before, this is my after. It's very subtle, so I can raise it a bit more. What if we put it at 0.06? Before, after. With this, it's more than enough. You may not be able to fully see the difference between the before and after, but you have to remember that color correction is based on subtleties. If we're too aggressive with color correction, it will be noticeable. So we have to be as careful as possible. In this case, this is more than enough for now. This is what we have in the original video, and here's where we are so far. And of course, where we're assigning a good part of the look is with those 2 nodes. This is the before and this is the after. Now comes the saturation moment. It's a very important part because we don't want to simply take our saturation control and start increasing it. Sometimes it can work, but in this case, although I like the blue tones a lot and the green ones too, it's really raising the skin tones and the reddish tones too much, which we don't necessarily want. And we can't control that just with this saturation button. What I'm going to do is go to the color warper, but I'm not going to use this tool as such. I'm going to go to this button we have on this side. This is a second option we have for the color warper. If we click on it, it will send us to these signals we have on this side. Basically, what it's indicating is the level of saturation we can change from the least saturated levels and then to saturate towards magentas or greens, or in this case, take the least saturated tones towards blues or increase only the yellows. What we can do is select only the least saturated parts of the magentas, and once we select this, we're going to click on this option, which is Auto Lock. What this will allow us to do is that when we move these parameters, everything else will be locked, so it will help us have much more control. Now that I have this activated, the way I'm going to modify these points here is to use this chroma button. I click, and if I drag to the right, here I can see how only the red magenta tones are increasing, nothing else in the image is increasing. Or I can even desaturate them if that's what I want. So I can have very good control of this. Now, in this case, I don't want to increase this so much, just a little bit towards this point. That's perfect. And now I'm going to do the same with the green area. I'm going to increase it a bit by taking it towards the left side. And here I can see how the part of the girl's blouse is the one that's increasing in saturation. Here it increases, and here it decreases. So here I have very good control of what's increasing. And what I find fascinating is that it not only increases the greens, but also the green that comes in some blue parts. With this same controller, we're increasing the greens on this side, making them go towards cyan, which results in a quite pleasant tone. Finally, I'm going to do the same directly with the blues. I take my chroma button to the right side, and I'm increasing the saturation quite a bit. As you can see, the saturation is quite high. But I'm having more control because the saturation button would have increased everything in a completely uniform way, which I won't always need to be that way. Here, I can say that I'm modifying the saturation, or tell it directly that we're using the color warper. In my case, I prefer to say that this is just saturation. And this button here is already indicating that what I used is the color warper, just as this one indicates that what I'm using are the color correction wheels. So that's why I prefer to put here that this is just the saturation part. From here, we're practically on the other side. The next thing I like to add is a vignette. Here I put that this is going to be my vignette, but I'm not going to do the classic vignette with this circle. What I'm going to do is rather take my gradient, click on this button, and adjust this to go from left to right. I can press this button that comes on this side, and what I'm going to allow is to see the effect of the mask. Everything that's in gray is what won't be affected. What's in color is what will be affected. I'm going to put this on this side, and then I'm going to add a second gradient by clicking here, and I'm going to adjust it to be on the right side. What this will allow is to put a vignette that's not circular, but rather from two lines, two gradients, which will enclose my main subject. Once I have this selected, I click again on this side or press Shift and the letter H. That's the shortcut to put and hide the mask. And now I'm going to give it to the offset to lower it. And I'm going to decrease the exposure. I'm not going to decrease it so much, but just enough to give my character a little more presence. Next, I'm going to press Alt and the letter O to add an output node that will come from this vignette. And this is the inverse mask of what I had in the previous node. So I hide the mask, and what I'm going to do here is give it a little more contrast and additionally put in a little more exposure. What this will allow is the before of the two nodes, and this is the after. Basically, I'm giving more presence to my main element, which in this case is the girl who's right in the middle of the frame. As a last additional step, what I can do is decrease the saturation part in the shadows a bit. In this case, it's not really that aggressive, but it's worth doing. I'm going to add what's called luma versus sat, which means that from a certain luminance range, I'm going to decrease the saturation level. For that, I'm going to go to this curves option, and I'm going to choose the one that has a little sun first, and then the drop. The sun means luma, and then here comes that the second is saturation. So from here, I'm going to select this button that's down here so that it makes this differentiation for me. And what I'm going to do is decrease this value up to here. Basically, what this will allow me to do is to say that in the less illuminated areas, in the darkest, the saturation is really 0, so that it's a complete black and not stained with red or blue, green, or whatever. And little by little, it recovers the saturation until it reaches this point where the saturation remains exactly the same for the rest of the luminance curve. If we see the before, we see here that all the shadows are very reddish, and now we have much deeper shadows. What this will benefit us is that when we have a gradient like this that goes from less saturated tones to the most saturated, which are these parts here, we can give it more depth, and that will help us avoid the typical plasta defect, overly flat look. Of course, we can give it a little more saturation if that's what we liked, but that we don't want to eliminate completely. And maybe in this case, around here is enough. Again, this is the before and this is the after of our image. And this is how we achieve a good level of saturation with good intention in midtones in highlights of a greenish color. But that's not so aggressive as to ruin our image. Remember to also join this channel and that there's the cursos.danielinphotos.com page if you want courses specifically on DaVinci Resolve. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe, and of course, comment on what else you'd like to see on this channel. Thank you very much and have an excellent day.